After a sermon is over, have you ever wanted to make a comment, ask a question, or listen to the preacher say more about a particular idea? If so, this podcast is for you. My name is Wes McAdams, and I'll be sitting down with one of my fellow McDermott Road ministers to discuss comments, questions, and thoughts that have come up after the sermon is over. Welcome to PS, the post-sermon podcast.
Welcome back to the PS Post Sermon Podcast. My name is Barrett Bingham. I'm one of the ministers at the Church of Christ on McDermott Road, and I'm joined, as always, by Wes McAdams, our preaching minister here, and I am on the east side of our building, and Wes coming from the west side of the building. And I don't know, I think I got it backwards immediately, just maybe because of your name, Wes and West, but Wes, coming from the east wing, I'll be on the west wing of the building under the same roof, and excited. Wes, thanks for taking the time to do another post-sermon podcast.
Oh, thank you.
To get into it. Started a new series for the month and a new sermon in that, but really tied nicely to the theme for the year. Why don't you give us a quick recap for those that maybe weren't here yesterday or haven't caught it on YouTube yet?
Yeah, so the big idea, of course, for the year is that we are sanctified, we are purified for a purpose. It's not just what we're saved from, it's what we're saved for. And so the idea of this series is that we are saved to participate in peace. And specifically Sunday, we talked about we're saved to be peacemakers. We're purified to be peacemakers. We're purified so that the Spirit of God can live in us and we can act in wisdom, the wisdom that James defines, or as James defines it, and we can be peacemakers with Jesus in the world. And so we talked in the beginning of the sermon yesterday about how Christmas time may be the time of year where we talk about peace the most, but experience it the least. We talk about joy, we talk about happiness, we spend time with family, we decorate our homes and all of those wonderful things. And we're talking about specifically the peace that Jesus brings. But yet at the same time, we're stressed out. We're at each other's throats sometimes. We're in the midst of conflict. And then we see conflict on a global scale as well. And so that tension and that paradox of wanting peace, talking about peace, believing in peace, but at the same time not experiencing it, I think is highlighted this time of year. So we talked about how we can experience less conflict and more peace by being peacemakers.
Man, fantastic intro yesterday. I thought you crushed it in that regard. It was very personal for me. I struggle this time of year with wanting more for me, my kids. You know, I wish I could afford more or get more for them or whatever it is, and then also being content and at peace. And like, why does the holidays have to be part of the rat race too? You know, so I thought that was a great, very personal intro. And then you kind of expanded to this global scale with something that one of my favorite questions to ask you is, did you say anything you didn't plan on saying? And this is 2 weeks in a row. You kind of gave me one of those, last week, I guess, was Matt's, but you said, I didn't plan on saying this. And then you talked about the Christmas Day truce of World War II and, this kind of interesting story, and taking that tension, that, peace, but not really tension from an internal and individual thing to, man, don't we see it on a global scale as well? And this was one of those times that I felt smart because I'd had a similar thought to you before, but maybe give us a recap of that idea as well, because I thought it was so good, just kind of the day after the Christmas truce.
Yeah, I was driving to the church building yesterday, or maybe it was even while I was eating breakfast and excuse me, looking over my notes yesterday morning, and I was just thinking about that paradox, that tension between the peace that we talk about and then the peace that we actually experience, and whether or not we're participating in being peacemakers. And it reminded me of that story. It's from World War I about the idea of the British troops and the German troops in separate trenches, and then on Christmas Day they come out and they sing songs and they play games and they celebrate Christmas together. They give each other gifts. And everyone talks about that story as if, isn't this beautiful and wonderful? And every time I've heard that story, I thought, no, it's not, because then they went back into their separate trenches and they continued killing one another. It would
Yeah.
be wonderful if they came out and said, you know what? We are all believers in Jesus. What are we doing?
Hmm.
Killing each other? Certainly, surely there's a way to end this conflict without us murdering one another. Wouldn't that have been wonderful if Christmas had moved them, if the idea of Christmas and everything we're celebrating had moved them to actually be peacemakers in a permanent sort of way? But instead, they just go back to killing one another. And so I brought that up in the midst of the sermon, not to, hopefully not to distract too much from the idea that we all experience conflict in our own personal lives, but also on a global scale, that there are a lot of people, and have been for hundreds of years, who claim to be followers of Jesus, who celebrate the Prince of Peace, but yet at the same time, we continue harming one another. We continue participating in the conflict in our own, little world, but also in all the earth.
Hmm. I don't know if you guys, as listeners, caught that, but Wes was so gracious in correcting me that it's World War One, not World War Two. Right after I said, "Look at how smart I am. I had a similar thought as you," and you're like, "Well, it's World War One, so
I
not
wasn't
with
trying to
that."
correct you. I was just trying to avoid the comments
Oh,
in the comment
exactly. Yeah,
section.
I'm so glad. As I said World War II, I was like, not even 100% sure that's correct. So I'm glad you're here to make sure we're locked in. We did have a comment from Audrey Hare. She goes to church here, and she said, "How And this is part of the big idea from yesterday, and so I think it's a good time to ask, and part of our recap of, well, how do we make peace? We're talking about being peacemakers. That's what we're saved for. We're going to get to a big idea of practically what do planting seeds of peace, what does that look like?" And she asked, how do we make peace with people that have different views without straining that relationship or ruining that relationship? And that really is a big picture question on how to be a faithful Christian in today's conflict ridden world.
Yeah. We talked about James 4 yesterday morning, and we talked about how we have conflict. We fight and quarrel with each other because there's something that we want that we don't have. And so I listed off about 7 different examples of things that we want but don't have. You did a good job just now of saying sometimes it is very tangible. It's, I want to provide more for my family. I want to give them gifts this time of year, and it
Right.
stresses me out that I can't give them everything that they want. And we feel that tension as well. And that stress can lead to conflict. But we talked about sort of some intangible things that we want and desire. The first of them, as Audrey said, is agreement. Like, we
Right.
want people to agree with us. We want agreement from people, and they don't give us agreement. And so it leads to tension. It leads to conflict. It leads to fights and quarrels in our life. And so that's one of the things. And the answer to the question is complicated. It's simple in one respect. James would say, be meek, show your wisdom in your meekness, and be a peacemaker. And so we talked at length yesterday about that. And so that would be my advice for all of us, that when we have a relationship with someone and we're not getting agreement from them the way we would like to, and maybe honestly, they're wrong, like detrimentally wrong. They're wrong about something that really matters, and we can't convince them that they're wrong. Be meek. Show your wisdom in your meekness. Be a peacemaker. And we listed off all the things from James 3 that James says, this is what wisdom from above looks like. This is what meek wisdom looks like. It looks like purity and being peaceable and gentle and open to reason and full of mercy and full of good fruits and impartial and sincere. Man, that's really good advice. When somebody doesn't agree with you, when they're wrong, when they're dead wrong about something, be open to reason. Like, be willing to listen to what
Mm.
they're saying. Don't be stubborn. Don't be bullheaded. Listen to what they're saying. Be peaceable. Find some common ground. Find areas where you can agree. And so you may never get the agreement from them that you want,
Hmm.
but you can be a peacemaker, even in a situation where you're not getting what you want, where you're not getting what you deserve, where you're not getting what you need, maybe. But you can still be a peacemaker, even in those kinds of situations where you're not getting the things from the other person that you want. It might be agreement. It might be, we talked about admiration. We talked about affection. And that can be true in all kinds of relationships. And so James's advice about practicing and demonstrating, showing the wisdom from above, man, that's relevant in almost any context.
Hmm. That's so good because it is so countercultural. It's the opposite of what we want. And
Yeah.
that's our calling, right? To be like Jesus, who was very countercultural and even denying his own needs and wants and, picking up his cross. And we're called to do the same. Well, and we've gotten ahead of ourselves. Maybe I got ahead of myself here, but let's talk about that idea of meekness, because that's something that you and I both could talk about a lot of just the biblical meekness and how do we define that. I know James does a good job of talking about biblical wisdom and wisdom from above. And why do you think the idea of meekness is so countercultural and misunderstood today?
Yeah. A lot of people define meekness as strength under power, strength under control. And so I've even heard people claim you have to be strong in order to be meek, that there's no way to be meek unless you're strong and powerful. I don't know that that's exactly the idea. They talk a lot about, a bit in a horse's mouth. And that's right. A horse is meek in that he is powerful. That's
Hmm.
kind of incidental, though. He's powerful, but even though he's powerful, he's under control. He's
Yeah.
controlled by the bit in his mouth. I even heard somebody one time claim that meekness was being devoted to something bigger than yourself. I was like, that is not what meekness means. And so we try all of these different ways of redefining meekness. My favorite, of course, is the commonly stated thing of meekness is not weakness. But here's the thing with that idea, meekness is not weakness. That's true. Meekness is not weakness. They're not synonyms, but meek people will almost always be seen as weak. You're almost always going to be perceived as being weak when you're meek, because meekness is the idea of not retaliating. Meekness is here's one definition. It's what I read yesterday. I love this definition. It's from the BDAG lexicon, which is one of the best definition books that defines Greek words. And they define it this way: the quality of not being overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance.
Mm.
That meekness is not being impressed with your own self-importance. We are the opposite of meek when we say things like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I've done? Don't you know what I've sacrificed? I deserve this. And when we demand to have things our way and have people respect us and give us the respect that we feel like we deserve, that's the opposite of meekness. Meekness is is letting other people go in front of us. It's gentle, it's humble, it's courteous, it's considerate. It is the self-giving love of Jesus. It is turning the other cheek. It is going the extra mile. That's meekness. And it will almost always be perceived as weakness in our culture, but especially in the first century culture, where if you were wise and you were strong, then you stuck up for yourself and you demanded to have things your way. You demanded your rights. You demanded that other people respect you. And we still think that way. Like you said, it is countercultural to be meek. It is countercultural to follow Jesus. This sort of wisdom from above that shuns selfish ambition and jealousy and sort of demanding our own way and pursuing our own desires. That was countercultural in the first century. It's certainly countercultural in the 21st century, where we have made the self the highest of pursuits, where the only thing that you must do is be your true self, pursue your true self. You do you, live out your truth. Those are the things that we hold dear as virtues in our culture. And Jesus calls us to something very different, to letting other people go in front of us, to considering others as more significant than ourselves, Philippians 2. And when we put on this mind of Christ, when we practice this kind of gentle, humble, courteous meekness, James says that's what real wisdom looks like.
Hmm.
Real wisdom isn't owning your opponents and destroying them with the best arguments and showing them how smart you are and how big you are and how tough you are. That's what we want to do. That's what we always want to do when people don't agree with us, when there's conflict. But Jesus calls us to this kind of meekness that is not overly impressed with one's own self-importance.
Man, That's really good. I can't believe you got through saying meek and weak that many times without getting tongue tied, man. I was very impressed. You said meekness and weakness so rapidly, and you nailed it. I immediately thought of, well, in my weakness, he is made strong.
That's
He
right.
is his strength is highlighted.
Yeah.
And again, just so the opposite of how I'll say I operate on
Yeah.
day to day
Me
is
too.
my reputation, my strength. I want to be perceived a certain way. It's something we talked about in our Wednesday night class. One of our Wednesday night classes here was like, hey, are we putting on, instead of being concerned about the face of Jesus and the Lord's countenance being lifted upon us, instead of that being seen through us, are we putting on this mask so that people are perceiving us the way we think they want to, or the way that we want them to. Hey, I come off this way, and so I want them to perceive me as strong and accomplished and a healthy Christian. And it's like, that's not at all what it's about. I think even putting on this mask and saying, like, yeah, I've got it all put together. I have a good understanding of my theology, and I am a put together peacemaker. Uh,
Yeah.
that is not, meekness. That is not a wise thing, but instead embracing, hey, I am broken. I mess up all the time. I wish I had this figured out. I wish I didn't struggle with this. I think that's the move, and that's the direction that we are called to. Go
And
ahead.
there's a peace that comes from that. There's a peace that comes from letting go of the desire to be perceived in a certain way, especially to be perceived in a certain way that's not true.
Mhm,
The desire to be perceived as put together, as smart, as strong, as powerful, as whatever, all the things that we want people to see in us, when we let go of that, it not only leads to sort of a better, stronger inner peace, but also it's amazing how much conflict exists in our life because we want people to see and treat us a certain way. And
mhm.
when they don't see us that way, when we don't get the attention that we want or the admiration that we want, the respect that we want from other people, it makes us nervous. It creates tension, it creates conflict, it creates fights because we are demanding that people see us a certain way. And so we curate a certain image that we put online that we want, we almost demand that people see us in a certain way. And so it's interesting if we were to just kind of step back and ask ourselves how much of this lack of peace that I'm experiencing or the conflict that I'm experiencing is because I am not being meek. I am not okay with being seen as weak. I'm not okay with being seen as foolish. I'm not okay with being seen as sinful. I'm not okay with being seen as what is really true. I really am sinful. I really am weak. I really am foolish. And if I was just okay with people seeing the real Wes, how much conflict would I avoid if I was just okay with people seeing the real me and knowing the real me?
I think that is where a lot of I think it's easy for me to be at peace with others. Easier,
Yeah.
like, just very personal take here. It's easier for me to be at peace with other people. It is a lot of my conflict is internal and conflict with self, and it's because I have a perception of what I'm supposed to be doing and how I should be, my self perception. Here's the things that I should have accomplished. Here's the things that I should
Yeah.
be. And you want to talk about just rife for mental anguish, right? And anxiety and all sorts of things that come from that conflict with yourself because well, I want people to perceive me one way, but I also want to do and accomplish in all of these my kingdom things. And
Mm.
it's like, man, that is when you can let go of that, that's the
Yeah.
piece that I think a lot of us are chasing internally. Um, yeah, you've already hit on this quite a bit, but the sermon kind of this contrast between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom, and in your own walk, which of those has been kind of the most challenging? We talked about jealousy and selfish ambition, and that's kind of where I'm getting to with my own thoughts, but versus the mercy and sincerity and gentleness and that sort of thing. Where do you see the most challenge for maybe you starting there, but then also let's talk about our church family, our community, just world in general.
Wow, that's really good. I mean, I don't know that if you're in a public role like a preacher, maybe some preachers don't struggle with this, but I know that I do. Like you get addicted to attention, you get addicted to admiration, you get addicted to applause, you get addicted to those things where when people are trying to encourage you and they say, "Well, thank you for this message, thank you for what you've done," and then when it's not there, it's not like you want the spot. It's not like I really want the spotlight. I don't want the spotlight, but then I wonder, am I okay? Did I do okay? Did I
Yeah.
mess up? Do people think I'm foolish? Did that make sense? And so you get addicted to sort of the feedback. And when you don't have the feedback, or when the feedback isn't positive, or when it's just, like people just don't care and there's apathy there, it it hurts. Like something in your identity has been tied to that admiration, that appreciation, that applause, that whatever, that it's very unhealthy, or it can become very unhealthy. And so I've struggled with that over the years, because when that's not there, when there isn't attention there, when there isn't, again, I don't want to make it sound like I want to be in the spotlight, because it's not about that. It's just about, I want to be useful. I want to be liked. I want people.
Yeah.
I want people to be benefited and blessed by the things that I say. And so when that's not there, when your identity is tied to that, instead of your identity being tied to who you are in Christ and that being secure, when your identity is tied to Christ, when it's because of not what you've done, but because of what you've received in Christ, then you can have this peace that passes understanding. And even when people don't pay attention to you, even when you're not making a difference, even when you have messed up in a royal way and you have made a big mistake, you can still be secure. You can still have assurance. You can still have confidence. You can have a peace that passes understanding. And so that's what we need to be pursuing. So often we're pursuing the wrong things. We're pursuing that instant gratification, because there is an instant
Good.
gratification that comes from that selfish ambition. And that is what is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. And so when you are selfishly ambitious for money, it could be money or it could be stuff, but it just could be the admiration of others. It could be the appreciation of others. And so sometimes we even get stuck in this in ministry. I've seen people do this even in behind the scenes types of ministries, and they're doing a really good work, but they desperately want to be appreciated. They desperately want, and they have a right to want to be appreciated. Of course, they want to be appreciated, but that becomes part of their identity, and now they're lacking peace. I knew someone one time that stopped coming to worship for years because the work that she did wasn't appreciated the way that it should have been appreciated. It wasn't, but because her identity got tied up in that, there was a selfish ambition there. And again, we struggle with this. That is of the flesh. And then the wisdom that's from above teaches us to put those things to death, to step away from those things, and to practice this kind of love and meekness and wisdom that is more concerned about others, that, as Paul says in Philippians 2, considers others more significant than ourselves. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I hope that we're all trying to do, is say, what areas of my life am I lacking peace because I'm selfishly pursuing something that makes sense? It's a reasonable thing to pursue, but it's not of Christ. It's not of the Spirit, and it's fleshly. And sometimes we don't recognize those things because we say, well, I'm not being greedy. I'm not, it's not about money. It's not about stuff. I'm not out here driving a Lamborghini or something, but I am pursuing the appreciation of my peers. I am
Yeah.
pursuing things that I'm lacking peace because I'm pursuing the wrong things, and it's not of the Spirit. And Jesus wants us to have a peace that passes understanding. And sometimes we don't have that because we're pursuing things that are earthly and unspiritual.
Man, so good. Thanks for just riffing on that. I was thinking of a million different things to say, but I'll say this. Even if I'm the only one that listens to this, worth it. You're very helpful and useful. So I think that's one of the things that I've kind of been self deprecating the last couple of lessons. I can think of a Wednesday night in the series, I guess in the fall, when I was filling in for you. And then even in one of my classes recently, of like, I've said, I am up here as a person struggling with wanting you to like me
Mm,
a whole lot,
yeah.
and that's not great,
Yeah.
that gets in the way of me selflessly and humbly delivering the word of God and letting the Spirit speak through me,
Yeah.
no matter what it means for me or my reputation, or how you perceive me. Uh,
Yeah.
Boy, do I struggle with, I sure would like to say this in a way that elevates my status.
Mm.
Oh, it's gross.
Yeah.
But thank you for saying all that. Okay, we'll kind of start landing the plane on this one. You emphasized, peace isn't accidental. And I love that. As an Enneagram 9, labeled as a peacemaker, right?
Mm.
I was like, yes, tell other people to be like me. No, but which is counterintuitive to the whole idea. But peace is something that is not accidental. It's something that we make. We are called to be peacemakers. We are sanctified and saved to make peace. And that is, I think, a very practical thing. What is kind of one simple seed of peace, if you will, um, that you wish more people would plant in their home or workplace, or maybe even here at church in the church family? But what are some things that you would like to see people do, and how this sermon and that idea changes people?
Yeah, I think to me the part of the wisdom from above that's part of making peace, of sowing seeds of peace that I think is so uncommon and needs to be talked about even more is that idea of being open to reason. I love that phrase, open to reason. It's the idea of not being stubborn. I said yesterday, not being bullheaded.
Yeah.
And sometimes we sort of pride ourselves on being unreasonable people. Like I have so much stick-to-itiveness that I'm going to stick to my guns no
Hmm.
matter what. And I think, sometimes that can be a really good thing. And sometimes that can be detrimental to peace. If you just, if we just were open to reason, just open to reason, you don't even have to compromise. You don't have to change your stance at all. You just have to listen. You have to be open to the possibility that maybe, perhaps, you are not as right as you think you are. You don't have the market cornered on the truth. That if we could just be open to reason in any situation, in any conflict, if we just entered the situation, entered the conversation with the posture of, I want to be reasonable in this situation. I want to be open to be reasoned with, that they can make their case, and I'm going to consider it as openly as I would want my own position to be considered. We want other people to be movable. I don't want you to be so stubborn that no matter what I say, you can't be moved. But for some reason, we think that
That's
it's
a powerful
virtuous
point.
for us to do that.
Right.
And so we have to be open to reason. And it's amazing the seeds of peace that we could plant in our marriages, with our kids, with our parents, with our siblings, with our coworkers, our classmates, our neighbors. If we just were known as being reasonable people, that, man, those Christians, I don't know that I always agree with them on all this Jesus stuff that they're always talking about, but they are the most reasonable people that you could possibly imagine. Like, if you present your case, they're willing to listen to everybody. That doesn't mean that they're always compromising. They're not going to compromise their convictions, that they're going to stick to their guns on certain things. But wow, they're so open to listening to other people. That should be our attitude. That should be the reputation that I want to have, that we all want to have, is that we are willing to listen and have a conversation with everyone, and we're willing to be as open to them as we would want them to be to us.
Man, that's so good. I have often said, as a pretty flexible person myself, and I mean physically flexible, that I put a lot of value on flexibility, right, and movement. I've always been drawn to, athletes and musicians and people that are performing that are, so graceful and just move really well. And I think that is something that I am drawn to in people, and
Mm,
I think that's a great reputation of. Are you the type of person that an idea that is different or challenging is going to immediately your first response is, I'm going to put up walls? Or am I willing to be flexible, not necessarily, like you've said, compromising or changing, but flexible? And that
yeah,
sure, I can bend down and touch my toes for 15 seconds or 20 seconds, maybe an hour, right? But I can be flexible. I can get in that position. I can reason with you. I can speak with you. We can go there. Doesn't mean I'm gonna stay there. It doesn't
yeah.
mean that I'm going to, alter everything about it, and that's how I walk around on all fours now.
Mm.
It's not changing, but I'm flexible. And
Yeah.
that was something we talked about. Again, hate to keep bringing up a Wednesday night class, but that was something we were talking about this past week of, are we leaving enough room in our lives to be flexible?
Uh,
And this time of year, kind of bringing it back to this idea of peace, we're singing about peace. And this morning, I'm late getting on the podcast because I have zero room in my schedule to be
uh,
flexible this morning, or leave room for other people, leave room for conversations, leave room for flexibility. I'm so scheduled. I've packed in all this stuff, and now I have to be pretty rigid. And, you know, so I think it goes to a lot of different things. Like, practically, are we scheduling enough space? Are we viewing other people as, well, they're an obstacle, or is this something that I can embrace and be flexible with and walk with, in wisdom and meekness and all these different things that we've talked about this morning? Where are we going with this sermon series? You want to take us through the next week or so, and then we'll kind of wrap up there.
Yeah, so next week we're going to talk about the prophecies. We're going to talk about Isaiah, and we're going to talk about Jesus and his birth and his coming to earth, and how he's the fulfillment of that, and how the message, the good news about Jesus, is the gospel of peace. It is, as Paul put it, it's the ministry of reconciliation. And so we often look at the brokenness in the world. We look at the lack of peace, both again on individual personal scale, but also on a global scale, and we sort of wring our hands about the lack of peace. Well, we're actually qualified to say something about this. We're actually recruited into a mission to help resolve some of this. And yes, we understand that there is a not yet aspect to that, that there's not going to be perfect peace in the world until Jesus comes, and then everything will be made right. But even now, even in the already, we are called to be peacemakers, and part of what that is proclaiming the message of reconciliation. It is proclaiming the message of peace, the gospel of peace. So we get to be the ones to go into all the world saying this is how not only God can be reconciled with humans, but also how humans can be reconciled with one another, how people of different tribes and languages and nations can come together in peace and love one another, turn their weapons into farming tools, and live together in peace and harmony, is through the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the message. And so that's where our trust has to be. Our trust can't be in princes. Our trust can't be in politicians. Our trust can't be in certain policies. Those things can have their place. But the real message, the real Prince of Peace, the real way, the path to peace is through Jesus. And we believe that. That's why we're Christians. And it's so interesting to me how so many of our Christmas carols, I may get into this on Sunday, I don't know, but so many of our Christmas carols are rich. I told Holly the other night, we got together as our elders and our staff and several guests, and we were singing Christmas carols. And I said afterwards, I think some of those authors who wrote those Christmas carols were just trying to pack as much theology into one sentence as they
Yeah,
possibly could.
yeah.
Sometimes the best verses in any of our hymns are like the latter verses of these Christmas carols. Joy to the world. I mean, some of the lines in that song are so rich. It's like, if we really believed this stuff, then not just at Christmas time, but throughout the year, we would not stop telling people, if you want the path to peace, it's the Prince of Peace.
Hmm.
Jesus is the way for us to not only, again, be reconciled with God vertically, but also for us to be reconciled with one another horizontally.
I don't know. I mean, you just covered all of it. I feel like, what are you going to do now that you've done the sermon?
Well, they don't all listen to the
That's right.
podcast.
Yeah. Nobody's listened this far, right? No, it's so funny you brought up Christmas songs and Christmas carols. That's what I was going to end on. I saw something online that was like, hey, there's really three types of Christmas songs. And it's like, we want snow, we want more stuff, and Jesus is perfect peace, and no saved person will ever taste death. It's like, okay.
That's so good. Yes,
There's kind
yes,
of, okay, there's a reindeer that has a light up nose, and also Jesus is the only way to life. It's like, okay,
yes,
what a
yeah.
spectrum, and what a
So
weird,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, very interesting. But well, thank you, Wes. Thanks for your time, man. And thank you all for listening. And we are excited about the next sermon and the next podcast. You can always send us comments and questions, and that will be linked below. And we are excited to continue the conversation in the weeks to come and in the years to come. So again, thank you, Wes. Thank you all. Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to PS, the Post-Sermon Podcast. To find out more about this podcast or about the Church of Christ on McDermott Road, you can visit our website at ccmcdermott.org/PS. If this has been an encouragement to you, we also hope you will rate and review the show wherever you're listening, as well as share it with a friend, because we believe sermons are not just for Sunday, but for our whole week and our whole life.